In this episode of The Ownership Economy, Jahed was taking some much needed time off, so I caught up with Andre Vanyi-Robin from Plastiks. Andre is working on a fascinating business model that aims to reduce plastic pollution around the world. Through a unique normalization of invoice data combined with smart contract technology, Andre is building a new market for plastic recovery guarantees. In the process, the venture is building a new revenue stream for plastic collecting communities around the world. We dive into the business model, how the token that underpins the model works, and why smart contract technology is a critical feature in making the ecosystem function. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Thank you very much.
Andre, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
So we like to start off these podcasts with getting to know you and your background a little bit, essentially your origin story. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in New York of a French mother, a Hungarian father. I, in that sense, consider myself French-Hungarian. However, obviously, having been born in the United States, I'm so fortunate to have been in an opportunity to embrace the culture and the entrepreneurial mentality, which ultimately I carried forth with me across my travels and living across the planet on 3 continents. But mostly I'm French, raised in a French background environment, and married to a Spanish wife for the last 32 years. So, which is where I've been in Barcelona, Spain, and very much an earthling as opposed to any specific nationality. That has driven all of my activities in entrepreneurialism, in company building, mostly in the IT sector. And I've gone through successes, I've gone through tremendous failures, and I've learned obviously from those failures, which allowed me to eventually be where I am today. So I guess the best way to describe myself is a entrepreneur that has known failure and success and has a passion for what he does.
Great. I think the best entrepreneurs have known failure, right? Because it leads to success, I think, in multidimensional ways beyond just kind of monetary success. They say that traveling makes you wiser, but potentially not happier. So, but you seem like a happy guy. Yeah. And I didn't put two and two together that you're in Barcelona. We should have done this in person.
You live in Barcelona?
Yeah. Well, I spend a ton of time here, so I pretty much live here. Yeah.
Okay.
Both Jad and I are here, so it feels like Barcelona is the I don't know, maybe one of the best cities in the world at this point. I feel like it's really going to grow.
Well, I support that statement. I've obviously been here on and off since 1990, so I've seen it pre-Olympic days, and the change was just incredible. And then I've seen it at the .com era and the .com bust, and then obviously in the 2000s. It's just amazing how the innovation and design DNA that this city has combines very well with the quality of life and a very cosmopolitan environment. So I will echo your statement. I will say definitely this is probably one of the best places on earth to live and to be an entrepreneur. Absolutely. And provide good quality of life.
Yeah. I feel like there's very few places where you could go kite surfing and skiing in the same kind of 24-hour period, but this is one of them.
Absolutely. And have a good nourishment session in between.
Exactly. Cool. So what brought you to kind of the Web3 space? Or crypto or blockchain, however we want to define it?
Well, I guess the adventure started in 2015 when I started really getting interested in Bitcoin and the impact of crypto in the economy. However, I really wanted to embrace a model that would actually have an impact on what for me is, and will be my biggest concern, which is the environment. And that started actually back in December 2018 when the Amazon forest was on fire. And I was wondering, well, how could a normal citizen do something? And ultimately, I said, well, the fact of the matter is that every morning we wake up, we're exposed to all this apocalyptic news about climate change. And we feel like we want to do something, but eventually we go to work after having commuted. We have meetings, we have reports to do, we have activity to do, lunchtime, then coffee time, then we get home, take care of the kids. And then eventually we go to, at least in Europe, put the garbage in the right place, in the right bin. And we ask ourselves, after such a long day where we started off wanting to make a difference, and at the end of the day, we're completely exhausted, saying, is it worth the effort of trying to figure out which bin to put the plastics in or the waste in? And then I said to myself, well, if we had the ability to really prove that it is worth doing the right thing, and a model that would enable companies and people to do the right thing, then that would actually help in time become an economy that's sustainable. And then I said, well, in terms of the decentralization, the strongest aspect of that is that the data is obviously objective. And if people know objectively and verifiably that one's economic environmental impact is being mitigated, one will actually make an effort to help mitigate that impact. And so that's why I combined Web 3.0 with actually sustainability.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the solution that Plastiks, the marketplace that your software company, Nozama, is it Nozama Green or just Nozama?
Well, Nozama is the company name. Nozama Green is the legal entity, and Plastiks is a product of Nozama.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about Plastiks and essentially the challenge that it's trying to solve.
Well, the big challenge is to try to have a traceable and verifiable method of ensuring that plastic's being recovered. And we decided to actually focus on the waste management industry, because the waste management industry are essentially generating revenues two ways. They're generating revenue basically by collecting waste, and they're generating revenue by sorting that waste and selling it to the recycling industry. So obviously trying to get them to become transparent is a effort requiring compensation. And we said, well, why don't you sell the data of your activity of selling the waste and create what we would call ultimately a plastic recovery guarantee. In other words, we will incentivize you by putting the data on a marketplace where companies and people will be able to buy the proof that you've actually done your job, the proof that you are actually collecting the waste and making sure that it's being sorted properly and sent back to the recycling industry. And then by doing that, we will also enable you to fund more waste recovery. And so ultimately what we decided to do was to provide them with the ability to create a plastic recovery guarantee, which is essentially converting the invoices that they are generating in their existing activity of selling the physical waste to the recycling industry, and converting that invoice into an NFT and putting up that NFT for sale as what most people would commonly know as a plastic credit. Very similar to what the carbon credit market started doing 15 years ago. We believe that, and we confirm that we are at this stage of development in the plastic credit market. And essentially, we decide to tell waste management companies, create plastic credits by basically taking the invoice, which proves that you've actually sold physical waste to a recycler, and that waste is going back into the recycling industry, and you can prove that it's not being thrown into a landfill or back into the environment, and put this plastic credit or plastic recovery guarantee up for sale.
So that was
the focus.
Yeah. So this is kind of going back to the original challenge. Plastic credits today, as I understand it, can be two different things. And one of those you feel is not really a great thing, which is effectively there are certain plastic credits that exist for just taking this material and putting it into the landfill. Is that correct?
That's correct. The world of plastic credits today doesn't guarantee that it's not going into a landfill.
Okay.
That's a fact. What we are guaranteeing is that it's going back into the recycling industry, and it's not being used. It's not just being pushed aside into another hole. And the second thing we're guaranteeing is basically that we are supporting the funding of more plastic recovery. Because in developing nations where the infrastructure is not where it is in Europe, how do you create a source of income to be able to recover more plastic? And how can you provide more income for entrepreneurs who want to be in the waste management business or in the environmental business, and obviously can only price their products on the basis of the sale of the physical assets? Well, now they can get a revenue source from the data. So all of a sudden, you are providing more means to fund more plastic recovery.
So I think of this like, almost a decade ago now, I was living in India for a while, and then I was living in Bangladesh for a while, and you'd have groups of people that would go out and essentially go into landfills, unorganized landfills, or go around the city. They would collect waste, They would then sort that waste, and then they would sell it on to a waste management company, or in many cases, they would sell it on. They'd actually have a direct kind of distributor that, would be organizing that waste and then selling it wholesale again, because so little was wasted in Bangladesh, given the size of the population. So what you're saying here, as I understand it, is the first step that you're doing is you're essentially generating an NFT for the invoice. Once the waste collector picks it up and resells it to the recycling industry, they're generating an invoice, and you're connecting that invoice to a smart contract that's generating a non-fungible token. Is that right?
That's right. Absolutely right.
And so how do you solve for, so let's imagine that this market continues to grow, which it will, because plastic is such a challenge and such kind of a durable and important resource, but at the same time is completely destroying, our oceans and our, all of our waterways. How do you solve for invoice fraud?
Well, the methodology of Plastiks is precisely a solution to that problem, where in order for you to mint, so basically to take it a step back, you can actually create your profile on Plastiks, and you can...
Who is you in this case?
You being a waste recovery project.
Okay.
Right? Or basically, let's just take two cases. You are a legitimate waste recovery project, and the other case is you are a person that wants to go into the waste recovery project business, right? So you think, okay, well, I want to be able to create these plastic credits. I want to be able to create these plastic recovery guarantees. So basically, you go to Plastiks, you create this, but you are not allowed to mint until you have been verified. Now, we do have the whole methodology to be able to mitigate the lack of worldwide standards on this subject. And our methodology is based basically on three major verticals: the onboarding of recovery projects, in other words, the policy of how to onboard recovery projects, the certification process, and the ability to produce plastic recovery guarantees. And of course, once you've produced the plastic recovery guarantee and you put it up for sale, the auditing process and the reporting duties that you would have to be able to do this. So this is really a three-step methodology that we've created and are developed and are deploying in all the countries where we're working. Just a quick parenthesis, we're working in India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Tanzania, Kenya, Ivory Coast, most of Latin America, Spain and France, and even California. And so ultimately, the onboarding process is defining what the requirements are for you to be able to mint, basically ensuring that you comply with these requirements. And that means looking at your tax ID number. It means looking at your certification number if you are registered on a waste management industry or agency. It can go to the most trivial activity, like looking at the pictures of your website. Are they stock photos or are they real photos? Go even further in this act of so-called triviality, typing the name of the company, the name of the directors, name of the staff, and add the word scam or fraud to it, and just do this full thorough background check before you are allowed to be actually verified to mint. Now, obviously, we are looking at projects according to their geographical coverage, the type of organization, if they're compliant from a legal perspective, what is their productivity size. I'll give you an example. We have to make sure that projects at least can recover 1 ton a month and have been operating at least for 1 year. So the person who just wants to start the business couldn't qualify, if we go back to the original point of this of this question. So one person who hasn't been in business for 1 year wouldn't be able to sell invoices and create plastic credits. And then ultimately, the process is met. If plastic recovery guarantees are up for sale. And then we have the random auditing, where we have to make sure that whoever bought this physical asset and paid for that invoice, we have to have the tax ID number, we have to have the name of the people. And what we're doing is we're confirming if they have actually paid for this invoice. And that way we can collect data on the 2 points, on the selling point and on the buying point. And then we know that the two parties going through the same process are legit. And at that point, we say, okay, well, then the plastic recovery guarantee is good. And then we score, right? We have a scoring system that eventually empowers the recovery projects within our recycling procedure to say, okay, well, we've issued PRGs, we've had no fraud, we have no instances, no red flags, and we get a score over time to be able to reach to 100. And the minute you have a 100 score, that means that ultimately the audits are very random and you are allowed to collect 100% off the sale of your PRG. But until you have a 100 score, you cannot be collecting 100% of the money of your PRG because you need to give us time for the audit. So all of this is to explain that it's all thought out, all defined, all proceduralized. And that's how we make sure that we're super scalable in order to allow these recycling projects or waste recovery projects across the planet to be able to generate that new income source.
Cool. So I think that was very comprehensive. I think like what would be helpful for me to understand. So in the first instance, what you're doing is you're almost creating kind of a platform for discovering these projects, right? So these projects are unorganized right now. It's very hard to know. I mean, I think of the informal experience of being in Mumbai or being in Pune or being in Dhaka, and you have essentially these, it could be very unorganized groups of folks. I mean, very organized on the ground, but very unorganized in kind of a traditional, if you're trying to do due diligence on a local initiative, in the way that we had Dr. Malin McKay come on in episode 27, and she was talking about how to build better connections for the development industry to local providers. And that's a really hard thing to do because the diligence process is quite difficult. And so I would imagine that the onboarding process for someone in California or Spain or France is fundamentally different than kind of the capacity building that you have to do on the ground in India or Thailand. Is that accurate, or is it pretty much the same?
No, it's not the same at all. And your statement is very accurate. Ultimately, that's why we specialize in all the geographies that we're working in to have the necessary understanding to mitigate the risks. Now, let's see. If I were to summarize the four risks, all right, four risks in terms of assessment, you'd have the legal risk, you'd have the financial risk, the operational risk, and the human resources risk. So that's just to break down briefly. On the legal side, obviously, we need to make sure that the projects meet with local regulations, that they have a policy that is inspired by international standards, and make sure that those international standards are in line with their local activity. And we have to also consider the environmental regulation that is in their country, in their geography, and measure how they're doing towards that. We have to obviously make sure that they are complying with anti-corruption policy, and most importantly, they have to accept our legal agreement, which reflects all of that. And so that would be one way. And then that's why we do it by country rollout, because we sort of like master the legal framework in each of those countries. So we can't roll out waste management projects on a haphazard basis. We do it on a methodology in a proceduralized basis when we do have the understanding of that legal framework. Now, from the financial risk mitigation, obviously we need to, we have access or ask for access for the evidence of current fundings and capital and general accounting documentation and a tax declaration. So obviously that way we can avoid any fraudulent activity on that point. And then from the operational perspective, obviously, we do want to have an understanding of their operational process. What are they using as a means of transportation? Are they guzzling gas to do this? Do they have the authorizations and the requirements from the local governments to be doing this, and they have to show it? Do they have an ISO certification? They have to show this. And obviously, from the fourth point, I guess, from a simple point of view, the human resources, well, we just ask for proof of salary payment because we want to make sure that there's no child worker being forced to do this job, picking up the waste, right? So we need to have proof of salary payments and things like that. So this is just a sampling of the data points that that we have and that we want to comply with in each geography. And the more we have more activities in that geography, the more adept we are at automating this process. So that's how we're able to deal with the scenario of Bangladesh, for example. We are not operating in Bangladesh, by the way. Currently, we're not operating there. We operate in India, but we're not operating in Bangladesh.
Cool. Well, I think there's a huge opportunity in Bangladesh as well, but the political environment's a little bit more difficult, to say the least. So at that point, so getting back to kind of so you build the discovery marketplace, you do the onboarding, you have this comprehensive process for onboarding that differs by region and takes into account kind of the legal, financial, operational, and human resource risk. Then once you essentially go through this, once, plastic has been recovered, I guess is the best way to think about it, and has been sold on to a recycler, you essentially print an NFT, or you mint an NFT rather, based
Correct.
on the invoice, correct? What does the NFT accomplish here? Like, why couldn't you just use, what is the point of it?
Well, the point of the NFT is ultimately to have transparency in terms of the invoice. I mean, you wouldn't be able to sell an invoice. So you want to have some sort of mechanism where you can convert the invoice into a instrument that does not basically reveal personal or private data of the business. So ultimately, the 5 data points are invoice number, date of invoice, type of polymer being sold, quantity of polymer being sold, and the destination of that polymer being sold. And then the NFT is the reflection of those 5 data points. The Plastiks reference is basically that you can trust those 5 data points. We have a copy of the invoice on our centralized database. However, what is decentralized is the basic, data points, which ultimately are free to be confirmed by anybody who owns that NFT. Call the company and say, hey, I've got an NFT that says that you've recovered 100 kilos of plastic. And then they obviously are compelled to show you the invoice, or you can call Plastiks and Plastiks is compelled to show you the invoice. So that, from a perspective of traceability and transparency, is really a very good tool, having an NFT. Very good tool. Just as you would
just to push back on that for a second. So
Sure.
I can see other reasons why an NFT would be necessary, and I want to go into them in a second. But just in terms of just to push back on the necessity of it, the invoice factoring industry existed for a long time. I know that's a different industry, but it existed for a long time without the need for the NFT. And so I'm just wondering, if you really had to hone in on, I understand the traceability element of this, but in terms of could the system have been built without Web3?
Well, who would be the centralized party? So ultimately, let me clarify that question. There are 2 building blocks for a Plastiks system to work, and for the plastic recovery guarantee system to work worldwide: invoicing and blockchain. Invoicing and blockchain. Those are the 2. I was at the World Economic Forum 2 weeks ago, as I'm on the Web 3.0 sustainability work group, and I was on a panel talking about world standards in plastic credits and in the recovery of plastic at a world level. And having 2 basic building blocks, which is an invoice which exists everywhere in all cultures, and making sure that the invoice is homogeneous or follows all the different standards, is one thing. And being able to have a model where you can know that there is an invoice related to an activity without revealing the identity of the activities. In other words, you can assume that there is an instrument that says this amount of plastic has been recovered, and it is completely objective. Nobody owns this data. It is completely objective. And then you combine these 2 things into a business model, which is ultimately answering the biggest problem. People say they want to save the world, but nobody wants to pay for it. So you can go and tell a waste management company, use this software, install this software, use this centralized software, and be transparent. And they'll answer, why? What for? How am I going to make money off of this? And why am I going to pay to become more transparent? I won't do anything until regulation punishes me to do it. But then all of a sudden you have an industry that has 4 years ago not existed, which is the NFT industry, which was driven by art. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, well, what is the utility of an NFT? And then you start going into the details of the utility, and you say, okay, well, why don't you link this invoice to an NFT so that the NFT can be connected to other NFTs. The NFT can be connected to social media campaigns. The NFT can be used for all sorts of marketing and RS and ESG purposes. And you don't have to be concerned of the legitimacy of the data because you know it's unique. So that's a business model perspective. Whereas saying, well, you can just have a registered centralized database and go like to Vera and say, yeah, this is a Vera database. Are you on the Vera database? And ask Vera. Well, if you're a project in Bangladesh and you want to get to talk to Vera, well, get in line. Go ahead, get in line. And maybe Vera will talk to you in 2050. Now, with this, you get, okay, I go online. I'm going to create my profile in a Web 3.0 environment. I'm going to upload my information, and then it's transparent. So then there's these procedures that are happening. And if I get verified, like I would on Twitter, and I get my green tick or my blue tick, I can start generating income. So all of a sudden, you're democratizing the process of transparency. You're creating a business model that funds transparency, and you're creating a business model that is actually funding the recovery of more plastics. That's the power of Web 3.0. And it doesn't depend on plastics. It's basically blockchain and invoicing. So these two components are basically, from our perspective, the building blocks for global traceability of plastic recovery and transparency. And it's irrespective of any centralized authority. And that's what the power of the NFT is. Now, I'd like to qualify something. We didn't want to be a speculative market. Very important point. Carbon credits are basically bought and sold on the expectation that they will be sold at a higher price. So you have I have a English memory lapse. Basically, the garnering of carbon credits, you're trying to hoard carbon credits, and because you want to sell them, so you're basically driving the price up. So what we wanted was saying, okay, it's a plastic recovery guarantee, $1, 1 kilo, no speculation. Now, obviously, Plastiks token is the tool that drives the marketplace. If you want to be able to acquire tokens now because you think that there's going to be a high demand on plastic recovery guarantees, go right ahead. But the price is always going to be $1, 1 kilo, because we are retiring basically 1 kilo of plastic. We don't want people to speculate. Once you bought an NFT that responds to recovering 1 kilo of plastic, that's it. You've recovered that 1 kilo. There is no such thing as a speculative element on that 1 kilo. Now,
I want to clarify that because just before we go further, because I want to get into the token in detail, but I want to clarify this for myself, which is one of the things that I think is really interesting about the NFT that doesn't seem to come out in your documentation, but maybe something that you're thinking about internally is that, so you've talked about the normalization of the invoice, right? Where you effectively are taking these different invoicing formats around the world and normalizing them. And two things emerge from that normalization process. So right now, the projects in and of themselves, the link is between the project that is collecting the plastic and then selling it on to, in the West or in developed or richer countries, that could be, it could be a large firm that essentially is collecting waste and then selling it on to a recycler. In India or Thailand or Latin America, it could be a group of people that are just going into a landfill, collecting it and then selling it on, right? But right now, the relationship between the folks that are collecting the waste and then selling it on to their client is direct. There's no intermediation by the platform. But one of the things that emerges from the normalization of the invoice process combined with blockchain, combined with the liquidity that you're generating in creating all these different projects around the world, is that you could actually get into the business of connecting buyers to that recovered waste, right?
Well, yeah, in theory, yes. The limit to what we currently do or want to do is not get involved in the physical economic activity, which is the collection of the waste and the selling it, but we want to be mastering the digital aspect of that. In other words, the data.
But just in building the platform, right? You certainly don't want to get into the business of collecting waste, right? But just in let's imagine that it's 2 years from now and you've got, 50,000 entities on the platform. You're going to be a better predictor of demand in a lot of these commodities and
That's
essentially
true.
aggregating demand and selling that, or aggregating supply rather, and selling that to big purchasers than that individual on the ground is going to be in identifying someone to buy their product. No?
That's true. Absolutely true. There's only, I guess, one nuance to be respected. The ownership of the data is obviously the waste recovery project and the waste management company, and we cannot exploit that data without unbeknownst to them. So ultimately, if there is an opportunity to be able to predict demand for certain areas and certain plastics, the business model related to that would have to be one that would share the revenues on all the smart contract issuers so that they would all benefit from this. Contrary to, I don't need to pick on Facebook or Meta, but right, they make a ton of money with our data. We don't know what's going on. And that's not the philosophy of Plastiks and Web 3.0. Philosophy of Web 3.0 is everybody is owner of their own data and can put up for sale that data if they want to.
Right, but so I guess like maybe so Meta is a good example because I feel like Zuckerberg, besides making a ton of money and connecting us all, did everything wrong over the past 15 years when it comes to just the world we want to create. But a better example might be Amazon, right? Which essentially reverse engineers its supply chain of the vendors on the platform and then creates white labeled goods, right? Which is becoming illegal in certain jurisdictions like India and is increasingly questioned in places like the EU and the US. But here I see what's super interesting about what you're doing is over time, the normalization of these invoices creates kind of, I know you don't want to go into the carbon credit business, but it does create a commodity that could have an underlying secondary market that could drive liquidity for these projects. As I understand it, right, the value add right now is a communications and a PR value add, right? So a company is essentially that is going on, you're creating kind of a value add for the companies that are directly involved in purchasing or selling on the PRG. But there's also a secondary market. I can go onto the marketplace and I can buy some NFT generated generated by an artist that's used some of this plastic, or talk a little bit about that.
Well, I guess our basic product is a plastic recovery guarantee. And as a plastic recovery guarantee, we're selling basically the fact that X amount of plastic and X quantity of plastic has been recovered and doesn't go into the environment. So how is that sold? Well, in three models. The third one is going to come up. This is first time I'm actually talking about this. I'll talk about it briefly, but the first two, the ones that we are currently engaging in, is a B2B activity where ultimately you have companies buying these PRGs to do two things: to offset their plastic footprint and to be able to comply with their social corporate responsibility by saying, look, we're buying these PRGs and we're actually funding the recovery of plastic in these geographies way and beyond already existing activities. Now, the other one is obviously through artistic NFTs, which is why the original tagline, The Art of Recycling, where we are enabling creators of NFTs and collections to say, okay, well, I want to have an impact in a certain geography, and I want to make sure that whoever buys my NFTs are going to make sure that X amount of kilos of plastics are being recovered. And an example is, for example, Hotel Lancaster in Paris launched a collection with all of its characteristics and features. And one of them was that you need to acquire 1 ton of plastic recovery in the Amazon, which was done. And ultimately, if that NFT is bought and sold, each time you want to buy and sell it, you need to attach a plastic recovery guarantee to it so you can have a measurable impact on the geography that is of interest to you. So basically, that is how we link the NFTs to this activity. And you can buy and sell these NFTs. Each time you do, you have to attach plastic recovery guarantees. The third one is we'll be launching.
Wait, I just want to make sure I understand that, right? So, and how, is there a percentage price of the original PRG that went into the plastic recovery, or is it the same price? How does it work?
It's the artist or the. Yeah, it's a good question. It's the artist or the creator's decision to say, my NFT, I want to make sure that each time it's being bought and sold, you're recovering 1 kilo of plastic, for example. And then you need to buy $1, 1 kilo from a recovery project in a geography that either the artist wants or you want.
Okay, and so they're not, and so the local population or the local firm or whoever is collecting the plastics, in this case in the Amazon, is not participating in the sale of the NFT. It's generating new demand for them to go and collect more plastic.
The sale of the NFT is generating new demand for them to collect more plastic. That is correct. Absolutely correct.
And then what's the third business model?
The third one is e-commerce platforms. We'll be launching on Shopify first week of November, the Plastiks plugin, where at the checkout process, you can actually compensate their plastic recovery related to your purchase. Now, ultimately, you can add an extra $1 to collect 1 kilo of plastic in a geography of your choice or of the vendor's choice. And that's the other model, very similar to what you have with carbon offsetting when you're confronted with the opportunity to offset your carbon footprint. Well, you will have the opportunity to offset your plastic footprint or to basically sponsor recovery projects in a geography that is of the vendor's interest or of your interest. And that is the third method, which is going to be launched first week of November.
Super cool, because like there's other business models that are out there, right, that have been around for a while. So I think of like TerraCycle, right, that was trying to do this. I don't know if you know of this company.
I do know them, yes.
Yeah, and like what they would do is they would essentially, upcycle plastic into new products effectively by collecting it and then reselling it. And they could never really create this liquid market. And so the Shopify app I like how you guys have kind of left it up to the vendor to figure out, look, we're creating kind of the liquidity on the supply side by bringing a bunch of projects online. We are geofencing those projects. We can't guarantee which project it's going to go to, but it's going to lead to plastic recovery in this area. So you're decoupling the post-consumer responsibility, or the responsibility to the vendor from the actual market, which now I'm starting to understand from a coordination perspective why Web3 becomes really interesting for this.
It becomes super powerful.
Okay, so let's talk about the token. Why is the token necessary?
Yeah, so other than the standard procedure of the token being the ability to transact on the plastics marketplace, the reason we created the token was to have a mechanism to build the scoring system that I mentioned at the earlier bit of our conversation, where in terms of you collect the sale of your NFT in plastic, the token, and it is staked until the audit processes are done, and then you can get 100% of the funds. So from a theoretical point of view, it would take you, if you started to create your profile and you started to mint and you start to sell your plastic recovery guarantees, it would take you 4 quarters to reach 100 score, to be able to collect 100% of the sale immediately. So in the meantime, you do collect the proceeds of your sale in plastic, but we need to provide you, we stake them for you so that we allow ourselves the time to audit you after the transaction is done, to make sure that whatever was done prior to the transaction in the verification process, in the onboarding process, is validated, and then you get a score. Eventually, 100 score, you can just sell your PRGs and collect 100% of your money from the PRGs. The token is meant to provide us with the treasury to be able to incentivize the staking of the sale of the PRGs, so that basically a scoring system can take place and the trust in your PRGs can happen. And ultimately, the more we have waste recovery projects, and we've got 24, the more valuable the token is, the more powerful it becomes as a tool to get more waste recovery projects to come on board and to be able to build a trust in terms of their plastic recovery guarantees. So it's a trust.
Okay, let me break that down just so I make sure I'm understanding all of it. So effectively, there is kind of a temporal problem between when these things are purchased and when they're verified. And effectively, you need to increase the number of projects on the supply side to create the liquidity for the marketplace. But what you don't want to do is have this problem where you're overselling really crappy PRGs. And so effectively what you're doing
Correct.
Is saying to the supplier, look, we're not going to pay you everything. We're going to pay you a percentage of the PRG revenue, and we're going to hold the rest in escrow for a period of time. And once we can kind of verify that you're following all of these kind of the 4 areas that you outlined up above, legal risk, financial risk, operational risk, human resources risk, you're going to reach this rating of 100, this audit score. And as a result of that, you're no longer going to have this escrow function. Is that
correct?
Right? Okay. So I get that point. Very cool use of staking. Walk me through the second thing you said, which is the more projects that come onto the platform, the more valuable the token is.
Well, obviously, because demand on the limited supply of 1 billion tokens, which is what was the issuance when we launched it back in October of 2021, means that you'll have more staking going on, obviously, because you need to have more trust being built by more and more companies across the world. So eventually, you'll have this ongoing demand for the token, which is going to reduce its availability, which obviously has to yield on price. And obviously, if the price is increasing, it becomes more valuable for the waste recovery projects to be able to be incentivized, to be able to build trust by holding onto a token that is worth more and more. So they would be obviously incentivized perhaps not to convert into fiat 100% of their NFT, but to be able to keep or staking a portion of those proceeds.
Okay, I think this is really important. I think this is really important. I'm not sure that I fully understand it, and I really want to. So, what you've essentially said is we don't want to be in the kind of the commodity market and building. We want to reduce speculation, and so the PRG is always going to maintain a par value of $1 per kilogram, but we need to somehow create scarcity in the market. And
Correct.
to create scarcity in the market, we've introduced this token and introduced this escrow framework whereby the increase in the number of projects will lead to scarcity, which will increase the price of the token.
Correct.
Which is super interesting because particularly in emerging markets, you've now created an asset for the local recovery operation, which may not
Correct.
be interesting to a recycling firm in France or Spain, but could be a meaningful amount of money for someone in Brazil or India or Bangladesh. Do I have that right?
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Okay. And so just walk me through the exact mechanism in terms of the allocation of tokens based on like the exact economics in the allocation of tokens so I can really understand how this scarcity emerges.
Well, basically you have an issuance of 1 billion tokens currently. There's 300 million in circulating supply. And the rest is owned by the treasury of the company, which is meant for the ecosystem over the next 5 years. And the waste recovery projects who are minting PRGs or plastic recovery guarantees are earning their sales in plastic. So the more PRGs there are being bought, the more there's a demand on that limited supply. Obviously, the more being staked, that's doubling down on the limitation on this. It's increasing the scarcity of that supply. So by those simple two drivers, the actual value of the token increases and ultimately becomes in of itself attractive to be held as an asset, because you know that the more plastic is being recovered, the more valuable the token will be, because the more recovery projects you have and the more basically staking is going on. And just to give you an upper limit benchmark, there's 350,000 million metric tons of plastic being produced every year. So ultimately, as a goal, you would want 100% of all of that plastic at the global level to be tracked. And tracking all of that plastic goes to the plastic token, obviously. That's like the upper limit, right? The sky's the limit type of vision mission. Now, our job is percentile-wise, how close do we get to that by 2050, for example, which is our business plan outlook until 2050? How close do we get to making sure 100% of the world's plastic production is tracked? Now, you can just imagine you only have 1 billion tokens issued. Smart contract does not allow you to create more. And then at that point, we've also added the faculty of burning 35 million tokens every year, each time you were to hit your upper limit of plastic being tracked on a global level. So we have added that factor for the reduction of token availability. Now, barring that point, the drive behind the value of the token is recycling, recovering plastic. The more projects are recovering, the more there is a demand on that token.
I get the way that the asset value of the token appreciates. What I don't understand is so if I was setting up this token, I think there'd be two ways that you could do it, right? You could essentially say, we're going to pay out to, what I'm trying to understand is how the payment evolves over time because you either have a fixed supply and you're trying to map you're predicting the fixed supply per year of plastic that's going to exist, and you're mapping a price preemptively to the token price that you're paying in plastic to the waste recovery firms or people, right? Or you could say, we don't know what the ultimate supply is going to be, and we have to have a decaying function for the token. We need to essentially pay out less each year. We need to have some sort of, it can't be purely linear. How have you solved for that?
Well, we solve for it by the fact that the upper limit is at 350,000 million metric tons. And to reach that, you literally have a huge uplift in terms of the token price to be able to achieve that objective. Now, that if you only have a billion token, then that clearly creates the uplift.
Okay, so you're paying effectively for the plastic recovery. The price that you're paying out is calculated in fiat. It's not like you pay one token for each kilogram, right?
No,
it's paid out in plastic, but it's measured. It's measured in kind of it's $1
1 kilo.
Okay. $1, 1 kilo. Okay. And so
$1, 1 kilo.
okay. So now I get it. So the plastic price goes up. You're not paying, the token in and of itself, you're paying less and less every single year for that 1 kilo that has been kind of covered. Okay. Now the economics make sense to me. Cool. Awesome. Well, we don't want to bore listeners too much with this tokenomics. But I really want to understand it. So, okay. And walk us through. So you had a lot of different blockchains that you could have picked. Tell us a bit about your choice and why you decided to build on this particular blockchain that's gaining kind of a lot of interest from people that, are interested in social impact.
Well, Silo blockchain really has two major drivers. One of them is the onboarding off-ramping function. All you need is a phone number and you can interact with crypto. And in developing nations, having the ability to do that because they've leapfrogged into mobile payments means that they have a free access to or easy access to crypto. And Silo specializes in that through its Valora wallet, for example. And the second one for us, which was the determining factor, was that Silo committed to becoming carbon negative blockchain by assigning a portion of its transactional fees into a treasury to buy carbon credits to offset the carbon footprint of its blockchain, of its transactions. And they were the first ones. I mean, everybody else is a copycat. Silo was the first one. From their genetics and their DNA, it's social and environmental impact. And you would think, yeah, but you're an NFT market. Why don't you go to Ethereum or some other chain? Well, at the end of the day, we think that Silo will eventually be as big as them because the world is going towards sustainability. And ultimately, if it's in your genetics to be socially and environmentally impactful, then your growth pattern is assured. And that's why we decided to build on Silo. We wanted to build on Silo because we wanted to have that covered in terms of carbon negativity, to be able to make sure that when you are buying a plastic recovery guarantee, rest assured it's carbon negative or carbon neutral, a bit less powerful than carbon negative. And then that the PRG will serve its purpose to recover plastic. So then you actually deal with the carbon problem and then you deal with the waste recovery problem.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So in your product roadmap, you talk about two other things that are coming out. So we talked a little bit about the Shopify app that's coming out that allows you to essentially choose at point of purchase, the ability to, I don't want to use the word offset, but the ability to recover your plastic from the product. And then you talk about two other things in the product roadmap, your swapping function on the marketplace and smart contracts for merging NFTs with recovery data. Can you talk a little bit about both of those?
Well, if you break down the concept of the NFT, so basically to understand your question is, how do you take the NFT into a real world impact? Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the NFT represents two things. Again, it represents something that happened and proves that it happened, and it represents something that must happen. So what happened? You recovered 1 kilo for $1, right? But then that dollar, 80 cents of that dollar, because we collected 20% transaction fee as a verification body, which is ultimately what we are, is going towards recovering another kilo. So then that NFT actually has an impact on plastic because it is funding the recovery. So it is taking care of the additionality problem. Because mostly in the world of sustainability, they always come with the critique of the additionality, meaning, well, if you didn't exist, what would change? Well, if we didn't exist, people would have less money to collect more plastic, but they would still do what they're doing. So now, because they have more money, they're collecting more plastic. So that is our response to the additionality problem and our response to the real world impact problem.
Right. Have you guys thought about, so we've talked a lot about the economics and the tokenomics of how this all works. Have you thought at all about kind of governance? I imagine that these communities that you're working in, there's an opportunity for democratizing governance over time. Is that something that's topical with the firm today or something that you're thinking about?
Absolutely. We talked about it in the white paper. Ultimately, the goal is to have a DAO that is obviously adhered to by all the different institutions at a world level, waste recovery projects, waste management companies, and to endow this DAO with plastic tokens out of our ecosystem to be able to make decisions in terms of the homogenization of the standards that we are advocating. And the biggest way to see the problem is, how do you ensure that there's a common denominator across all jurisdictions? In other words, how do you ensure that the Indian invoice is the same as a Kenyan invoice, right? Because ultimately what you're buying when you're buying a plastic recovery guarantee is an invoice. So you want to make sure that all the different requirements in that jurisdiction are in line with the requirements are in the Kenyan jurisdiction. So how do you get to those 2 points? Well, you need to have institutions who will come together and align, saying, yeah, well, an invoice has to have a stamp. An invoice should have a signature. An invoice should be red, blue, and so I don't see Plastiks doing that, but they'd be doing that on the DAO, and that would be an ongoing process. I mean, we've got a 2050 business plan. I mean, our goal is to be, by 2050, ultimately to have one plastic left, one token left, right? And then we've basically essentially tracked the entire plastic production across the planet. And then humanity knows that it can grow sustainably because nothing is being left untracked. And then you will not find, obviously, a random Coca-Cola can in the Indian Ocean, because who's responsible for that. So that's the ultimate vision.
Amazing. Cool. So we're getting to kind of the end of the pod here. Where should people follow your work and stay online and in touch with you?
I think the best way is to definitely go to the blog, Plastiks blog, plastiks.io. And there we're constantly updating as to, which new projects, what new country, what new partnership has been established. And then obviously sign up for the newsletter that we're constantly informing our thousands and thousands of plastic holders and supporters on what's going on. So just typing in your email and getting the newsletter is another way to do it. Not having to physically go for the blog, but just getting the blog sent to you.
Awesome, Andre. This has been really informative and I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. Looking forward to having you back on sometime soon to go into more detail and hear more updates on product roadmap.
Thank you very much, Martin. So grateful for the opportunity and to be able to share this time and the experiences of Plastiks. Very grateful and look forward to being on the program in the future. Have a good day.